All right, so let's talk about the first 100 days. Obviously, it has been a contentious and volatile 100 days, no doubt about that. A change of policy in many effects. And we did talk about this. We said before he even started, you're going to see a change in potential tax policy, change in fiscal policy, change in trade and immigration policy. We're seeing all of those things. So let's start to go through it because it started on day one with a whole lot of blue ink.
Oh, it certainly did. And his famous Sharpie, as far as signing all those executive orders, it's been fast and furious in terms of those executive orders. In the first 100 days, according to the presidential committee out at the University of Santa Barbara, there's a group out there where they do all sorts of analysis. They said 142 executive orders have been signed. And just for some perspective, President Biden signed 162 during his full 4 years. So it's been a lot. Now, it's obviously ranged a gamut of things. A lot of the focus has been on tariffs lately. And I think that's really important. When we were drafting our outlook and published that back in early January before the inauguration, we kind of figured that he'd want to prioritize tariffs, get those done out of the way, get the uncertainty, get through that. And right now we are working our way through that uncertainty. And then he can shift the focus more towards the tax reform, deregulation. Because if you think about the power that the president has, it is very limited in terms of what he can do. These executive orders, trade policy, he can do things with immigration, but he himself cannot pass tax reform, right? Spending reform. He can do something with deregulation, but that's a much longer process.
Well, because it's law, and these are not law. And the EOs can be undone by the next E, right? So there's no question that we can see that. And of course, you mentioned tax policy. It is moving through both the Senate and the House are now in committee trying to work these things out, and we're paying particular attention to it because it has a direct effect on our clients and our listeners here today. And one of the things that we're watching closely, and it's getting a lot of coverage, is the SALT deduction. What happens with that?
Yeah, so SALT's the state and local tax deduction. If you pay state income tax, property tax, used to be that you could deduct the full amount of that, and now it's limited to $10,000. And the interesting thing about the way that it's currently written is that whether you're individual or married, it's $10,000. Now, oftentimes if you're married, they're going to double it, but they didn't with the SALT deduction. So a lot of people kind of were upset about that because especially if you're living in a high property tax state, like let's say New York or California, that is a very valuable deduction.
And they could hold this bill up because their constituents in New York, New Jersey, and California do want to see that number go up. Today it's at $10,000 is where the cap is. The number that's being thrown around is $30,000 per year, but that's another pay for. How that gets done will be important, along with promises made, promises kept.
Exactly. And that's been one of the recurring themes is when he has gone on television and when you watch his press secretary, promises made, promises kept, that's with tariffs. He said, I campaigned on this, so it shouldn't be that big of a surprise. Now, the amounts, the timing, the breadth, right, took the market by surprise. But he said, he has made it very clear. He believes in tariffs, so we'll have some form of that going forward. We don't know the final form. But then immigration, that was also a big one. He said that he would close the borders. When you look at the border encounters, which is kind of a proxy for the number of people coming into the United States illegally, it's at a very low level. We still have legal immigration coming into the United States, but it does look like that has been a promise made that has been kept as well.
And then one point I was trying to get there is when you talked about no tax on tips and no tax on overtime, that will be tied in with the SALT conversation on pay-fors and what they do with changes in tax law, especially with corporate tax rates. There was an initial conversation lowering the corporate tax rate from 21 to 15 and then having this millionaire's tax. That looks like all of that could go away.
That's right. And the President Trump, he did release what's called his skinny budget, which it's not the full details.
It's not the one big, beautiful bill.
It's not a big, beautiful bill, but it's about as far as, okay, what are some of those pay-fors, not just in terms of tax code changes, but now the spending priorities as well. That was about a 23% reduction in the non-defense discretionary parts of the budget. So that could be a significant amount. It's about $163 billion per year, so around $1.6 trillion that could go towards paying for some of these other promises as far as no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Or one thing that I'm kind of excited about is the prospect of full expensing for small businesses. That could be huge in terms of stimulating.
But not just equipment, but perhaps buildings as well. And I was telling a client this week, they haven't heard it, but this person is in the manufacturing business and his eyes got pretty big, saying that would be pretty big. So folks, we're trying to tie all of these things together. And I know that the landscape has shifted. There's no doubt about that, right? But let's look forward through a positive prism. And that could be an extension of the tax cuts. It could be lower rates from the Federal Reserve. It could be continuing progress with earnings. And, of course, an end to the uncertainty on tariffs. All of that would push the market forward. We have made some changes to our asset allocation. We're watching this very closely as we put all of this together and we change our asset allocation. It's very difficult to do this on your own, but there's a way that we can help.
That's right. We have a very structured approach that we go for asset allocation, whether it's stocks and bonds or what's within the stocks or within the bonds, really looking at what are the risks and are we and our clients compensated for those risks. So we focus on companies that are profitable, that are trading at better valuations through a risk management lens to make sure that you're not getting over your skis with any particular position.